Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. First, I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. I know I was fortunate to be able to spend Christmas Day with my son and daughter-in-law, and then was able to travel back to Alabama to visit more family. And now it always seems like this week between Christmas and New Year's this lull that you get into is always a little bit bittersweet because of all of the joy that we're leaving behind with Christmas. And unfortunately, in Jessie's world, that also means we're saying goodbye to her Mistletoe Meadows Christmas Sweet Romance series, at least for this year. Wink. But on the bright side, it means we get to go back to one of my happiest of happy places, that is Sweetwater, North Dakota. That's right, our new release this week is Book 7 of Jessie's Sweetview Ranch Sweet Romance series, A Cowboy's New Family. Now, I've got more about A Cowboy's New Family in just a moment, but first, as Jessie likes to do, she's included a dish within this story, and we thought it would be fun for me to make it for you here today, in another segment we like to call Cooking with Jay. Now, today we're making Bacon-Gouda Egg Bites. Egg bites, if you're not familiar, are something that's been popularized lately by Starbucks, and they're essentially muffin-sized quiches, I guess. But they're very simple to make at home, and they make a wonderful breakfast meal prep that you can cook, on the weekend and have breakfast for the week planned if you want. They heat up really well, they reheat really well, and so that's a wonderful option. Plus, it's a very versatile recipe. You can customize it a million different ways, and I'll talk about that in a second. But so, without further ado, let's jump in and make some Bacon-Gouda Egg Bites. First, as always, don't worry about trying to copy these ingredients or the directions down in real time. They'll be listed in the description of this video down below. All right, let's take a look at those ingredients. You're going to need 6 eggs, 1 1/4 cup of egg whites. You can certainly divide these yourself if you like, but store-bought is so simple. You're going to need 1 cup of cottage cheese and small curd if you can find it. You're going to need a teaspoon of black pepper and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Next, you're going to need 4 to 5 pieces of cooked bacon, chopped. Personally, I like bacon, so I'm using 6 pieces of the thick sliced bacon, but the key is you want to get it cooked until it is nice and crispy and then chopped up pretty finely. Last, you're going to need 8 ounces of smoked Gouda, shredded. If you can't find smoked Gouda at your store, that's fine. Regular Gouda is fine. If you don't like Gouda or don't have that available, cheddar cheese is fine. And going along with that, if you prefer cooked crumbles of sausage, that'll work instead of the bacon, or chopped ham. You use what you like. After you've cooked and chopped your bacon and shredded your cheese, your first step is going to be to preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Then, in a large bowl, add your cottage cheese and use a whisk or a hand mixer to whisk that cottage cheese until it's smooth-ish. You want the curd consistency to be very small. And as you can see here, I've got one of these little immersion blender deals that's got a whisk attachment, so I'm using that. Automation makes this much easier, I'll say that. Then after you get your cottage cheese blended up nicely, you're going to add to that in the bowl your eggs, your egg whites, your salt and pepper, and then whisk that all up very well. You're going to want to make sure you get all that cottage cheese off the bottom of your bowl and incorporate it into the mixture very well. Next, you're going to take a muffin tin. I found these silicone trays work really, really well. I still also spray mine with cooking spray lightly. In your muffin pan, you're going to divide up your cheese. Then, on top of that, add your bacon. Once you get that divided out, spoon your egg mixture into each muffin cup until it's just about full. You're going to pop these into your oven and let them cook for between 26 to 30 minutes at 350 degrees. Now, this is what they'll look like when they're ready to be pulled out. You'll notice that they're all fluffed up. They do fall back down when you pull them out of the oven. That's not a problem. You've not done anything wrong, certainly. Now, this is very important. Remove them from the oven and allow them to sit for at least 5 minutes before you try to remove them from the muffin pan. After that 5 minutes, put a wire baking rack over the top of them, upside down, and then flip it, and they'll come right out. Another important note, allow these to cool completely before you store them in your fridge. Otherwise, you'll get lots of condensation in your container, and that's just kind of gross. But ladies and gentlemen, here it is, Bacon-Gouda Egg Bites. They are delicious, and I hope you will give these a try. It is a very simple recipe. It's very delicious, it's very versatile, and it's a great way to meal prep breakfast for the whole week. I hope you'll give it a try, and if you do, as always, let us know how it goes down in the comments. Let's talk a little bit now about A Cowboy's New Family. A Cowboy's New Family is the long-awaited and much-requested story of Clyborn brother Tobias. The Clyborns, as you might remember from the previous books in the series, are a group of siblings who live and work together on the Sweetview Ranch there in Sweetwater. And they moved to Sweetwater after the death of their parents from Wyoming, and they chose to all stay together and buy this ranch and work it as a family. Now, Tobias has been helping an elderly neighbor of theirs off the ranch, Mrs. Wells. And Mrs. Wells has been telling Tobias about her granddaughter, Tosha, who has been having a lot of problems. Tosha is a single mother of 5 who is in dire financial straits, and her grandmother has invited her to come live with her on the farm there in Sweetwater. Tobias volunteers to help them move to Sweetwater, but more than that, since Mrs. Wells began talking about her granddaughter, he's felt led to help her out some way, and he feels that God wants him to make a real sacrifice, I guess, and propose a marriage of convenience to her, a woman he's never met. Now, will this marriage of convenience lead to something more? Of course, you'll have to come back this Friday to find out. But for now, here is the opening chapter of A Cowboy's New Family. I hope you enjoy it. Then come back this Friday for the full release here on Say With Jay. Tosha gripped her crying child and looked around the kitchen she'd called home for the last 6 months. It wasn't much different than any kitchen she'd cooked in since she'd left her mother's home when she was 16. Ratty old linoleum. 2 cupboard doors were missing. 1 hung crookedly. The sink leaked, and the stove was minus 1 heating element. There was no microwave. She'd lived without one more than with, and she tried to tell herself it was better for her children's health that way. Whether that was true or not, she wasn't entirely sure. She'd seen articles saying it was so, but when a person was trying to find enough money to buy groceries, the cancer-causing elements of microwaves weren't exactly the most important consideration. The baby in her arms fussed, and she automatically swayed back and forth. After 5 children, she had been ingrained with the ability to quiet a crying child. No, she wasn't going to miss this place at all. Her oldest boy ran through, chasing his younger sister who cried and screamed for her mother. River had a tendency to be dramatic, but Mitchell, her oldest boy, had a tendency to be mean. Tosha always blamed his father for that, but maybe it was the poverty they'd lived in Mitchell's whole life. A soul-deep tiredness seemed to sap the life out of her, but she couldn't afford to stop and rest. Her grandmother had said she was sending someone to help her move the last of her things out of the house and take her and her children to Graham's house in Sweetwater, North Dakota. Tosha viewed this as a new start, an opportunity to right the wrongs of her past, chart a new course, and make decisions that were smart and forward-thinking, especially when it came to her children. She hadn't done well by them, and it was time she took control of herself and did what needed to be done even if it was hard, and even if she would rather do something else. She told herself this as she held out an arm so River could run into it. "Mitchell is being mean," her daughter sobbed against her side. Phoenix, her 6-month-old, squirmed in her arms, not liking the fact that he no longer had his mother's full attention. "He just wants you to react. If you ignore him, he'll quit picking on you." Her voice sounded tired, and it lacked the authority she wanted to convey. After all, Mitchell had yet to get tired of picking on anyone, and he seemed to love nothing better than to make someone else cry. That wasn't to say that Mitchell didn't have a soft heart. He really did. He just seemed to have a split personality. Sometimes he was the sweetest thing, and sometimes Tosha wondered if he could really be her son. Bailey, her 6-year-old, wandered into the room, clutching her dolly to her chest. She hated moving more than all the other kids combined. If nothing else, Tosha hoped this move to her Graham's house would be the last move ever, just for Bailey, who longed to have an actual home with roots and neighbors and security. Something Tosha had not been able to give her since her first husband had left when Bailey was less than a week old. Jemmy, too, waddled into the kitchen, sucking her thumb and dragging a blanket. Even in her short life, she'd moved 4 times. This scene had to be familiar to her. At least this time they didn't have to pack up the beds, which were falling apart. Except for Bailey's and River's. Their bed was an old mattress on the floor. Phoenix used a pack-and-play as his crib, and that had been easy to pack away, even though it was broken and she had to fold the sides carefully to get it to roll up the way it was supposed to. "When is the man going to be here?" Mitchell asked, standing on the couch and looking out the window down the street. Tosha hadn't even tried to put curtains on the windows. At one point back when she was still young and naive, she decorated each house they'd lived in with whatever frilly knickknacks she could scrounge up from the second-hand store or yard sales. But for the last few years, she'd lost any thought of staying in one place long enough to make the effort worth it. Or maybe trying to keep up with 5 children, work a job and make enough money to make rent, and worry about when her latest man was going to walk out. They always walked out. Had kept her too tired to worry about something so frivolous as home decor. That type of thing was for people who had money and time and help, or no kids, a faithful husband, a high school diploma. Her mother had told her one day she'd regret quitting school, but she'd been convinced she was in love and had thought her mother was dead wrong. She'd tell her mother she was right, except she'd died of pancreatic cancer 2 years prior, so Tosha didn't have a chance. "Someone's pulling in," Mitchell announced from his vantage point in the living room. "What kind of vehicle?" Tosha asked as she held River, who still sniffled, and Phoenix, who was ready to go down for a nap but wasn't going to sleep in this house again. "An SUV. It's blue." Mitchell could sometimes be difficult, but he was her best helper, too, and she depended on him to help her out more than she should. Or maybe it was good for children to have some responsibility and feel like they were contributing to the family. She'd read that somewhere, but she couldn't remember where, and she didn't want to mess her kids up any more than what she already had. Jemmy toddled to the door as Mitchell went to open it. "Just wait," Tosha said, not sure if the guy her gram was sending to get her had a blue SUV. She pulled her phone out, sending off a one-handed text, while River fussed because she'd let go of her. Her gram's answer came back right away. "Yes, and he said he just pulled in." "Hang on, Mitchell," she said, but too late as he'd opened the door while she was looking at her phone and had gone through it, Jemmy waddling after him. Just how she wanted to meet this dude, her gram couldn't say enough good about, chasing her kids, flustered, and more tired than she could ever remember being in her life before. "Stay here," she commanded River before she hurried out to grab Jemmy, who, despite being female, was the most precocious child she'd had. There wasn't anything that kid hadn't tried. And if there was a way to escape, Jemmy would find it. When she was younger, Tosha had put the pack-and-play upside down over top of her to keep her from climbing out of it. That had worked until Jemmy had figured out that she could slide it over to the stairs and crawl out from under it. Of course, she'd gone down the stairs head over heels, and Tosha had thought that she died. But after crying for a couple of minutes, Jemmy had been right as rain. It was Tosha who had taken the rest of the day to recover and who still had nightmares about it. She'd grabbed Jemmy, glancing up to see the man who had gotten out of his SUV. It was a newer model, if she wasn't mistaken, and it looked clean and shiny. Way too nice for her ragtag family. Jemmy resisted being picked up and started screaming in protest as Tosha held her around the waist, trying to keep a hold of Phoenix, who was fussy because he should have been sleeping and was missing his nap time. She struggled to balance both kids and almost plunged head first down the 2 steps to the sidewalk. If Sioux City had a bad part of town, this was it. But the man looked tall and strong and capable. Not the kind of man who had ever looked twice at her, although she definitely looked more than once at guys like him. If she had waited, like her mother had told her to, for someone like him to come along, would he have been interested? It didn't matter. She reminded herself that one of the things she had committed to when she had decided to change her life was that she was not interested in men, not even a little. She'd had terrible luck with them, picking cheaters and liars and lazy bums with a certainty that gamblers would envy. Still, she wasn't going to be rude. Jemmy continued to cry. The man stopped in front of her and held out his hand. "You must be Tosha Wells. I'm Tobias Clyborn. Your gram sent me to pick you up." Her hand slipped into his. It was rough and hard and felt like it knew how to work. His face seemed serious, but those deep blue eyes also held compassion and, not pity, but maybe understanding. Or maybe she wanted that so much she conjured it up. Regardless, she was so taken aback it took her a bit to answer. Before she could open her mouth, she saw movement behind the man's head, and in the next split second, she realized that her son had jumped into his SUV and started driving it down the street. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great Jessie Gussman audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.